What if the person you helped yesterday was actually a part of your past that you never knew? Victor has always lived alone, stuck in an empty routine, until one rainy night he did something he never did. He gave money to a young mother in a difficult situation. The next day, he found her again, but not just anywhere. She was kneeling before her late wife's grave. What started as a simple gesture of charity turned into the shock of his life. Who was that woman? What was she doing there? And why did she look at him as if he carried a secret that could change everything? Victor looked at the wine glass in front of him, slowly turning it, as if he could find some meaning in the dance of the scarlet liquid. The restaurant was one of the most expensive in the city, the kind of place where the menu price was considered an affront to common sense. He knew that. He also knew that the men around him were there more to show off than to really enjoy the food. "That wine cost more than a sports car, Victor," commented Lucas, a businessman who thought he was very witty. Victor didn't look up. "I hope he takes me home, because this dinner is killing me." Lucas let out an exaggerated laugh, clearly more to please himself than to find it funny. Victor sighed. When dinner was finally over, he gave a slight wave to the others and headed out into the street. The rain was falling relentlessly, the kind of storm that made every drop feel like an accusation. Victor pulled his coat to protect himself and started walking. He was passing shiny shop windows and people running when something caught his attention. Under the awning of a closed store, a young woman sat, holding a baby in her arms. She hugged the thin coat around the child, clearly trying to protect him from the cold. Victor stopped, not because he was the charitable type, but because there was something about her, something that held him in place. He hesitated, then approached slowly. The woman looked at him with suspicious but exhausted eyes. "Here, take this," he said, taking $350 from his wallet and handing it to her. Her eyes widened. "Serious? Or are you testing if I'm an angel in disguise?" Victor blinked, surprised by the answer. "If it's an angel, at least let me know. I need to rethink some choices before the end." The woman smiled slightly, perhaps more out of irony than the gesture. "Thank you. I really need this." "Buy something other than gas station food," he said, adjusting his coat as the rain hit him again. "I'm going to try." Victor took one last look at her and walked away, feeling a strange pang in his chest. It wasn't exactly regret, but something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He was not the type of person to give charity impulsively. He had always preferred bank transfers and charity events with endless speeches, but for some reason, the image of that young woman and the baby stayed with him the entire way home. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered if something could really break the empty silence that inhabited his life. When he got home, he threw his keys on the table and sat on the sofa without even taking off his coat. The apartment was huge, silent, impeccable. Everything in its place, with no traces of life. He took out his cell phone and opened the messages without much desire. Business news, event invitations, nothing that really mattered. His eyes strayed to the window. The rain continued to fall, and he found himself thinking about the girl again. "I must be getting old," he muttered to himself, massaging his temples. He decided to take a shower and go to bed, but when he lay down, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the scene again. The baby, curled up against its mother's chest. The look was tired, but full of something he no longer recognized in himself. Hope. He turned to one side, then the other. He counted numbers, tried to distract himself with any irrelevant thought, but it was no use. Deep down, I knew something was about to change. The next morning, the alarm clock rang, but he was already awake. Routine. It all came down to this. He put on his usual suit, drank the coffee he didn't even taste, and got in the car to go to one of the places that, as painful as it was still part of his daily life. The cemetery. Victor had already lost count of how many times he had been there in the last 23 years. He walked along the usual path, bypassing the already familiar graves and stopping in front of Laura's tombstone. "Good morning, Laura," he murmured, putting his hands in his pockets. Still not answering, huh? At least that hasn't changed." He stayed there for a few minutes, listening to the wind pass through the trees. He always wondered if he was just talking to the wind, or if, somehow, she could hear him. Then something different happened. A shadow moved further ahead, near the tomb. He frowned and took a step forward. There was someone kneeling there. He blinked, confused. A woman. At first he thought it was a coincidence. But as he got closer, his heart jumped in his chest. It was her, the girl from last night, Clara. She held the baby in her arms, her shoulders shaking slightly. Victor felt a shiver run down his spine. What was she doing there? He cleared his throat, and the woman turned sharply, surprised. His eyes were red, his face still streaked with tears. "Are you following me?" he asked, crossing his arms. Clara blinked, confused. "What?" "No, I'm visiting my mother." Victor laughed, without humor. "Well, unless your mother has the same name as my wife, I think you're in the wrong grave." Clara looked down at the tombstone and took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm not." Silence. Victor's stomach dropped. "Laura was my mother." The world stopped. He stood there, frozen, staring at the young woman as if she had just said she was an alien. And then, for the first time in years, Victor didn't know what to do. Victor remained standing still, staring at Clara, as if she had just announced that she was the Pope's daughter. "I don't think I heard you right," he said, crossing his arms. "Do you want to try again?" Clara sighed, running her hand over her tear-stained face. "I said Laura was my mother." Victor laughed without humor. "Funny, because I was married to Laura, and as far as I know we never had children, so either you are very mistaken or someone out there is selling fake family trees." Clara narrowed her eyes. "I didn't know either until recently, but I swear I'm not lying." Victor let out a long sigh, looking up at the sky as if asking for divine patience. "Right. Let's pretend this conversation makes sense. How exactly did you come to this conclusion?" Clara hesitated for a moment, clutching the baby to her chest. "I was adopted when I was a baby. My adoptive parents never knew much about my birth mother, but a few months ago I started looking for information. I discovered documents, some letters. Everything led me to Laura." Victor narrowed his eyes, trying to decipher whether Clara really believed what she was saying or whether she was a very convincing opportunist. "So you find all this, appear in front of me and expect me to just accept it?" "I didn't expect anything," Clara replied. "I just wanted to see where my mother was buried." Victor was silent. The wind blew through the trees, and for the first time he really looked at Clara. She didn't seem to be lying, but that didn't mean he believed it. He looked at the baby, who was moving his little arms inside the blanket. "And this one?" He pointed with his chin. "Is there any further revelation to make, or is he just here to dramatize the scene?" Clara snorted. "This is Gabriel, my son." Just, I don't know what you want me to say." Victor shrugged. "A pleasure, Gabriel. Welcome to the soap opera of my life." Clara closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. "I know this is a lot. Do you think so?" She ignored the sarcastic tone and continued. "I just wanted to understand who my mother was. I didn't come here expecting to find you, much less that we were going to have this conversation." Victor passed his hand over his face. His head throbbed. "You know something? I'll need proof. Letters, documents, DNA testing, a time machine, anything that isn't just your word." "I expected that." Clara opened her bag and pulled out an envelope. "Here are copies of everything I found." Victor picked up the envelope as if he were handling dynamite. Excellent. I'll take a look at that. In the meantime, try not to appear out of nowhere in my life again. My heart already has enough problems. Clara bit her lip. I don't know what to do with this either, Victor. But believe it or not, I don't want anything from you. Victor watched her for a moment. If you don't want anything from me, then why are you here? Clara hugged Gabriel to her and looked at Laura's tombstone. Because I just wanted to meet my mother. Victor had no answer. He looked at the tombstone too, as if he expected Laura to suddenly come out of the grave to clarify everything. But as always, Laura said nothing. Victor sat on the couch, staring at the envelope as if it were going to explode in his hands. He could just ignore it, throw it in the trash and move on with your life. But for some reason, he couldn't. Come on, Victor. You have dealt with far more dangerous business than a handful of papers. He opened the envelope and spread the contents on the table. There were copies of adoption records, a birth certificate, and letters. Handwritten letters. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Laura's. Your stomach churned as your eyes ran over the words. Victor can never know. He stopped breathing. I know him. He would give up everything to be with me and this child, but I can't let that happen. He built something big, and a baby. A baby would change everything. The room around him disappeared. The world shrank until it fit inside that single page. Laura was pregnant. She knew, and she never told. Victor dropped the letter and ran his hands over his face. 23 years. How could he live so long without knowing this? He lay there for a while, lost, until something inside him lit up. He picked up the phone and dialed. Clara. Victor, meet me at the cafe on the corner in half an hour. What? But... He hung up before she could protest. Clara was already sitting when Victor arrived. He threw the envelope on the table and sat down opposite her. You were right. She looked at the papers and then at him. So you believe me? Victor let out a short laugh. Let's say the facts forced me to believe. Clara was silent for a moment. And now? Now. Victor exhaled. I have no idea. Clara smiled, but it was a sad smile. Welcome to the club. The two remained silent, listening to the noise of cups and conversations around them. Victor pointed to Gabriel, who was sleeping in the stroller next to her. I was right, he has Laura's eyes. Clara looked down and really smiled this time. I know. Victor rubbed his temples. That means I'm a grandfather, added Clara. He grimaced. Do you need to say it like that in all letters? Clara laughed. What did you expect? Congratulations, you leveled up and unlocked a grandchild. Victor sighed. I'm not prepared for that, nor was I about to be a mother, but guess what? It happened. Victor looked at her, then at Gabriel. Do you want me to be part of your life? Clara became serious. I don't know. But I think Gabriel should meet his grandfather. Victor nodded slowly. We can try. We can try, Clara repeated. The two looked at each other, and for the first time since they met, it seemed like they were on the same side. Victor didn't know exactly what he expected when Clara invited him to dinner at her apartment. He spent years surrounded by luxury, accustomed to boardrooms with marble tables and events where a simple handshake could be worth millions. But none of that prepared him for the moment he stood in front of the door of Clara's small apartment, holding a paper bag with a bottle of wine and a package of diapers. Because apparently that's what grandfathers did. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Clara answered with Gabriel on her lap, and her eyes widened when she saw what he brought. Did you bring wine and diapers? I thought it covered all ages involved, said Victor, holding out the package. Clara laughed and invited him in. The apartment was simple but cozy, too small in Victor's opinion, but he kept the comment to himself. The smell of food filled the room, and Victor realized that for the first time in a long time, he was having dinner in a real house and not in an expensive restaurant. "Sit down," said Clara, going to the kitchen. Victor obeyed, but continued to watch the baby moving his hands in the air as if trying to grasp the world. "Does he always do this?" "What? That strange movement with your fingers." Clara looked at Gabriel and laughed. "Yes, Victor, babies move. He's not trying to cast a spell." Victor snorted. "Are you sure? Because I swear he looked at me like he knew something I didn't." Clara shook her head, serving the dishes. "You'll have to get used to it. He will stare at you a lot." The two sat at the table. Dinner was pleasant, more than Victor expected. For the first time, he and Clara talked without there being any suspicion in the air. "You don't cook that bad," Victor commented, finishing his plate. "So bad? Was that a compliment?" "It was the best I could offer," Clara smiled. "It's good to know that my culinary talent didn't ruin this attempt at coexistence." "Speaking of which," Victor wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Do you think this is working?" Clara was silent for a moment. "I think so. It's been less weird than I thought." For me too." The two were quiet for a moment, listening to Gabriel mumble in the cart next to him. "So," Clara began hesitantly, "do you want to hold him?" Victor blinked. "What?" "Gabriel, want to hold your grandson?" The word still seemed absurd. "Grandmother." But before he could dodge, Clara grabbed Gabriel and placed him in her arms. Victor froze. "How do I handle this?" "Him." "That is a baby, Victor." "Right. How do I hold it?" "Relax." Victor tried, but his arms were as stiff as a plank of wood. Gabriel opened his mouth and made a short sound, as if he was judging his grandfather's lack of skill. "Will it break?" asked Victor. Clara laughed. "No, but you might start crying if you realize how clumsy you are." Victor snorted and adjusted the baby in his arms. "Is that better?" "Much better." He looked at Gabriel and for the first time felt something different. "He has Laura's eyes." Clara nodded. "I know." Victor sighed. "That means I'm a grandfather," added Clara. Victor grimaced. "Do you need to say it like that, in all letters? What did you expect? Congratulations, you leveled up and unlocked a grandchild?" Victor laughed. "I prefer to think that I've just been given a new role and I don't know how to do it." Clara smiled. "Relax, Victor. No one is born knowing." Silence settled in, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. "Thank you for being here," said Clara suddenly. Victor looked at her. "Thank you for letting me be." Gabriel stirred in his arms, letting out a soft sound before falling asleep. Victor was surprised to realize that he was holding it more naturally now. "I guess we're really trying then," Victor said. Clara nodded. "I think so." Victor looked at his grandson sleeping in his arms, and for the first time in many years, he felt like he was finally home.